Grandma, can I have the chocolate chips?
This secret recipe moment made possible by Emory Heart and Vascular Center. When Grandma needed heart care, she came to Emory. The difference? Emory Healthcare performs more heart procedures annually than anyone else in Georgia, which means better outcomes for our patients. And we offer advanced and personalized treatments developed by our top specialists that others don't. Like Grandma knows, where you start your heart care matters. Smart Cookie. EmoryHealthcare.org/smartcookie.
A choice right now, between fear and love. It's just a rock.
Out of the dark night of ignorance and into the shining light of truth.
Expanding reality.
A population of citizens capable of critical thinking.
We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are.
There's a level of reality where everything dissolves into an ocean of energy.
We empower our experience by insisting on our authenticity.
That's very profound. Very.
Expanding reality.
Welcome to Expanding Reality. I am your host, Brandon Thomas. On this episode, we got the honor to sit down with Jenny Rivers. She is a body worker and energy worker. She's into womb yoga therapy, which is pretty cool. We talk a lot on this episode, guys. We get real deep into the cyclical nature of reality around us, in nature, in everything. And it's a wonderful conversation, guys. She is absolutely remarkable. Y'all will love this. So check the show notes for all the ways to find her and also all the ways to find us. So without any further ado, guys, let's just get right to this amazing conversation. Help me in welcoming Jenny Rivers. All right, everybody, a very special episode. We have Jenny Rivers on with us to hang out, talk about all the awesome things. She is very cool. We met on Union of the Unwanted when they did the spiritual show. That was really cool, and that was a great opportunity to see everybody in a little bit different light in that environment, right, under that name. So I just was incredibly impressed by what you said, so I wanted to get more out of you. I wanted to find out more about you, so invited you on the show. Here you are. So if you don't mind, for my audience that doesn't know you yet, do you mind just telling us just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. And thanks so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. And for those of you who don't know who I am mainly a body worker, energy worker, and then over the last couple of years, been doing more with mentoring women in helping them understand their menstrual cycles. So I kind of use the menstrual cycle as a map to explore your own journey. So I kind of talk about the feminine archetypes and just the importance of understanding our cyclical nature, especially as women, but this has kind of grown over the last several months into recognizing the importance for everyone to understand cyclical wisdom and our cyclical nature, whether you bleed or don't bleed, or whether you're a man or anyone. So.
Yeah, and the cycles are fascinating because you see these in nature all the time. We correlate these to all sorts of things. We, monitor our existence by them in the shape of our calendars and all of those things. So cycles are incredibly important. And I think on a deep spiritual level as well, they resonate with all of us because you go through these peaks and valleys with either your religion or your spiritual awakening or however that presents itself in your life. But there are cycles and ways. And you, even in, let's say, if you go crazy with the manifestation process, then you'll see things kind of pop up for you to deal with them again, or you'll be able to kind of predict cycles or alter them or shift the current of your life in a certain way. But all of it does work in that way. So these types of elements, whenever you apply things like the concepts of circles and cycles and mapping time, and then being able to expect these things again and use them to your own benefit, or at least be able to walk into these things with a little bit better of an understanding that they're just a repeat of everything else, right? So what brought you to that correlation? How did you connect the two?
Well, I've always been really interested in like our natural processes of being alive and being human. But I would say it really kicked off for me probably about 6 years ago when I started, I wanted a deeper understanding of astrology. And so I was kind of like, I had a general understanding of the different signs and what they all kind of represented. But I wanted it to come from me. I wanted it to come from my own understanding versus like reading what someone else's interpretation was. So I started just noticing what sign, what zodiac sign or what constellation the moon was in. And so I would write this in my calendar and I would just kind of start to notice. And it was kind of like, I don't know, like I didn't really notice much until one day I went, I was at work and I went to the bathroom, and you said I could talk about anything. So I might get a little graphic here.
Be you. It's all good. Be you. And thank you for the heads up.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So I started bleeding. I started my cycle, and I went back to my calendar and I noticed that the moon was in the exact position it was in when I was born. And I was like, wait a second. Does this happen every month and I'm just now like noticing it, or what's that about? And so now looking back, I can kind of see this as like a synchronicity for, you know, the universe telling me to look deeper into this and kind of explore what this meant. Probably around that time, I found the work of Alexander Pope, who's one of my like foundational teachers in understanding menstruality, which is like, kind of changing our perspective of what the menstrual cycle is. And she talked about these different seasons, these 4 seasons. We can talk about them like these inner seasons that women go through every month of their cycling years. And it just completely changed everything in terms of how I think about myself. And going back to like what you were saying earlier, is I think that there's like an expectation that there shouldn't be ebbs and flows, that it's really healthy to be stable. But that's just not, unfortunately, that might be more convenient for modern living to have more stability in terms of our emotions, in terms of our motivation or our energy levels. But that's just not how we are. We do have those ebbs and flows. And so changing that perspective has brought so much more self-acceptance and self-love into my life as well, because like when I do have those dips in energy, or I'm not as creative or motivated to work, I understand that this is just part of the cycle and that things will change. And maybe this is a time to rest, because that's incredibly important to nourish ourselves and give us the rest that we need in order to fuel ourselves for when those creative times come back.
Absolutely. Like you nailed this thing. You said it perfectly. And back to what you said about the menstruation stuff. Yes, it's a little, dude, I'm kind of, whatever. But I will say this. I encourage everybody to just be as authentic as possible, because what we're all doing here in expanding our reality together is figuring out the universe and figuring out, what's going on and what's possible, and talking about those ideas. Now, part of that being as authentic as possible is if you guys are as authentic as possible, because it's all important. It's all part of the story. So even this, the season thing, I think that this is very helpful. This is interesting. I'm learning something. And I think that whenever you say, oh, this might be gross or whatever, usually it's because we don't know enough about it. So if you're informing us on more things about it, all we have to do is have that little bit of inquisitiveness to go, you know what, let's hear her out on this. And I've got a great audience, and everybody's very interested in what you're saying right now, so I'm going to get the hell out of your way. But if you don't mind, extrapolate on that a little bit, because I find that your observation with yourself, again, because you were able to be so honest with yourself, is why you've come up with this great idea about this particular topic. So if you don't mind, just continue on that. That's brilliant.
Yeah, well, I love the idea too of taboos kind of being guardians into a deeper level of understanding and of deeper levels of awareness. And so, obviously menstruation is a huge taboo, and most people are like, yeah, get away. I don't want to go there. I don't want to know. I don't want to hear about it. And for someone like me, I'm like, ooh, let's go see. And I think, there are some taboos that are maybe supposed to be there, but I think a lot of taboos are really like I like this idea of like these guardians of thresholds.
Yes.
We find them in nature with like when we go into wild spaces, we find poison ivy and nettles, stinging nettles, and there's ticks. And you don't find them deep in the forest. You find them just at the edges. You find them there to keep out those who aren't ready to kind of go deeper. And so I like to think of menstruation as a guardian of deeper wisdom and understanding for all genders, for all walks of life. I mean, if you know a woman, this is relevant because it will help you understand her ebbs and flows, whether that's your mother, your sister, your wife, or girlfriend, or whoever, or someone you work with, So yeah, I as I've explored this work, I've been able to see that, cycles are what time does. So as time unfolds, it's impossible to not exist in a cycle. Even things that are artificially made follow this cyclical pattern of like something kind of is in this void, or it's dreamed, like it's an idea first, but it kind of comes out of nothingness. So like there's a void, there's a nothingness in which something is dreamed. And then there's like this seed, and then there's a germination as it starts to grow. And then it's emerged, it crosses like a threshold in which it's birthed. And then it kind of has this peak experience. Like I like to use the metaphor of a plant because it's so like obvious, so as a plant will grow and blossom or bear fruit, that's kind of like the peak experience of that plant's existence. And then after that, there's like this natural decay and death process. And then the seed it was in the ground, and now it's out, and now it's a new seed, and now falls back into the soil and returns back to source and starts all over again. So you can look at literally everything, anything in your room, anything in your life, even like an activity, like going to the grocery store. Like it all exists as this like idea. And then there's like driving to the store or walking to the store, and then like doing your thing there, and then walking back home, and then it's over. So yeah, it's so simple, but I think it's so like, because it's so obvious, we tend to overlook it.
Absolutely. And what you said about whenever things go through these cycles and we can kind of expect them, this is kind of the idea that lends itself to like the simulation argument or something like that. How scripted it is, how predictable it is, but also how we kind of, even on long historical stretches, kind of get amnesia to it. We kind of like people will be out there saying, yes, this is what's happening because it's happened before. Look, here are all the signs, and people still ignore it. And there's no like wisdom in that, which is interesting why things kind of constantly pop up. They talk about this karmic cycle as well, even like you said, the life and death cycle. And I love how you point out the 4-part progression on that: the death, the growth, the peak experience, the release, and the decay. And all of that is exactly scripted out in a million different ways, scripted out over billions of different combinations of cycles. And what I find so interesting is how people will find cycles that have to do with like bees in Ireland and how they affect polar bears somewhere. It's insane, these like ripple effects that people talk about, and especially the ripple effects of the connectivity of human beings. Whenever you do something kind, that translates. When you do something shitty to somebody, that also translates. It can, depending on the individual, as long as they don't filter it as something negative, right? But a lot of these things propagate out, and it's these mini whirlpools in time that I'm very fascinated with, as far as even things like the moon, like menstrual cycles, like things like this are very interesting to me, like how bears go through their cycle every year in hibernation and all of these things. Like all of it's found in nature. And so what do you think is the greatest lesson or takeaway from the observation of this natural wonder around us?
Recently, I've been really liking the metaphor of this idea of a living matrix. And it's kind of like similar to what you're saying with like the simulation, which like this kind of like this, I can think about it in terms of this kind of 3D plane that has all these grid marks, or like I see kind of Indra's net, if you're familiar with that, like Buddhist concept of like what you were saying, you know, all these jewels and everyone reflects everyone else and it's all interconnected. But recently I've really liked this idea, because waves are like frequencies, like, you know, they go up and down and everything has this frequency, of thinking about it like a symphony. Like there's this glorious, like infinite symphony that's playing. And there's, you know, all these moving parts, all these different instruments or different like sections within an orchestra, and they all have their own part. And when everything's harmonized, it, you know, you're not playing the same thing, and you might not be overlapping, but when you kind of can step away and listen to the whole thing, that's when you kind of recognize the beauty of this song that's being played. And it's impossible to kind of know, like I like to think about, like, you know, if something's going wrong in your life, you might feel like, oh, like why me, or something's wrong. But, you know, there's no way for us to, because our lives are so short and our perspective is only like from this one individual being right here, right now, you know, it's impossible to hear the whole symphony that's going on. Like we don't know what was playing before we were here. We know a little bit, but, and what's going to come after it. So there's this there's a deeper level of trust in the universe that when we start to harmonize with this living matrix, or like the infinite symphony that's playing, so many amazing things start to shift and happen for us as human beings.
Damn, you're cool. I'm so glad we're doing this. You're amazing.
Yeah, thanks.
It's just the wisdom is so cool, and I love back to I also just keep getting flashes of what you said about taboos being kind of like the guardians. I love that metaphor, because we say this with things like I always talk about how on TV, anything that they talk about in the news or whatever is an inversion of reality. So it's like the opposite. So that's like your metaphor for it being a guardian. It's kind of, that's perfect. You're like, yeah, it's if they tell you not to, then that's probably what you should be doing, or you should investigate that further.
Exactly.
And what I like to visualize cycles as being is like a spiral, you know, and so we constantly think of this spiral thing to where you kind of, if you picture like a circle from the top, it would look like just a cycle going through, and then you have like 4 different environments on it. But as you go through those different environments, you're also raising in frequency, raising in understanding and consciousness. So you'll repeat through the same environments that are fixed on the outside, and those may be great times, so-so times, shit times, and getting better times, right? And you kind of go through those. And what's interesting also about that is I've heard of it referred to that you know, enlightenment and stuff isn't like a vertical line, or it's not like an upward progression. It is more of a cycle or a spiral, because the tough times at the top, it would be or at the bottom of the wheel, rather, if we're doing this visually. So tough times would be represented at the bottom, good times at the top, and you go through them cyclically. So the good times prepare you for the shitty times at the bottom times remind you to be in the moment and be present, enjoy those top times of the cycle. And you constantly repeat these actions, but the dynamics are what change, and you're what changes. That's what that elevation in consciousness allows, is this progression through these cycles that enables us to view it differently and to approach these similar challenges with new understanding. Do you think there's much to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this every time, you know, something painful from my past comes back up into my life, where I'm like, I thought I healed this, or I thought I was over this, or I thought I like worked through this. But, you know, it's like layers of an onion. And like you said, like it's like this spiral that keeps going. And I don't think, you know, healing or this like self-discovery or understanding ourselves is like, there isn't an end point to it. Like it is an unfolding, and it is a cycle, and it will come back. And there's going to be, you know, you need this new, every time it comes back, it's like, that's yourself telling you that you're in a different place now than you were before when you've dealt with this. And now you have different tools and different understanding. And let's look at it now and see like what changes now, instead of like, you know, being hard on yourself or saying like, you know, that I'm not good enough or that I need to do more or whatever. It's just be more gentle and recognizing that, you know, this is a good thing. This is a good thing that it's coming back up, because it means you've grown and that it's time now is the time to revisit it.
Yeah, beautifully said. And as humans, I think that we constantly want to figure out, the great mysteries, like what happens after we die. And I think that model of past lives and karma and, all of that reincarnation, that may come from our observation of the natural world around us and us trying to explain things that we don't understand or that we can't really comprehend contextually. We try to contextualize those things by anthropomorphizing the cycles around us and seeing them in a way where we can look out to it and project. I think that this is where we get the idea of the as above, so below thing. And I think that whenever you talk about cycles, I get this image lately of this entire existence, all this is. And I've kind of come to this over, just looking around at it, looking at how people have the two totally different experiences in the exact same area, and physical, like people see different things. You think of UFO phenomena, right? Someone will be two people standing there, one of them sees it clear as day, the other does not. What is that all about, right? Well, when you play this out over like a long period of time, then the image back to that is that I get, like, whenever you look out, what you're really looking at is the submolecular level of another you, which is you, because that's all there is. When you look in on a submolecular level, it's you zoom in far enough, you're going to get to our solar system, and then there you are on that little ball, and then it's you looking at yourself. So it's this constant fractal type of a thing, and it works on this scale to where it's insurmountable, but it's also like everything is here. There's nothing else. There's nowhere else to go. And so what you have here, but then you run into the philosophical ideas of like, well, what is it all about? What's this for? So let's go there. What's this for? What's this all about? And you don't have to plant your flag. I'll say that as a caveat. You can just tell us your favorite idea, or one you're playing around with.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think right now what seems most relevant is just recognizing exactly what you just said, that we are the universe kind of, experiencing itself, and it wants to have these experiences. It wants to experience everything. And so that's why there's so many of us and so many different forms of life and consciousness. Is the universe is like really excited to have that experience. And I think that that's kind of pretty much sums up my answer, is that's at least how I feel. Like, I feel like I want to experience it all. And there's so much to be learned from so many experiences, whether they're positive or pleasurable or painful. I mean, I think even sometimes where I'm like looking at choices that I've made, I'm like, wow, I think like there's part of me that wants to experience that pain, experience that depth of feeling. And so I'll like craft this like drama. And so, in one part, it's like the drama can be so fun, because, even if it's like painful or we're going through it and we on the surface say, I don't want to experience this. I think there's a part of us that desperately longs to have an experience in order to like communicate that to the whole. But then simultaneously, there's something else that's going on that's like the observer, that's just like observing it all and is completely unaffected by any of that and isn't part of the drama and is just neutral,
Yeah, the one watching the movie. Like you're the character in the movie, you just don't know it, right? Like the Truman Show kind of. And then the observer is you just sitting back there with popcorn going, oh, this is pretty cool. It's a mind-blowing idea. Like all of this stuff is just crazy to me whenever you get really, really deep into it. So what's your thought on the artifacts of this matrix, on things that are inexplicable? Let's just, for example, like Bigfoot or UFOs or paranormal. There are a lot of, even like deja vu or Mandela effect, there are a lot of interesting artifacts that play out in this arena. What is your thought on if they're real or not? And if they are real in your mind, or there's something to it, what role do you think that they play here?
I think I like to think that we have much more power over what it is that we perceive in our environment. And that's probably like somewhat we are creating it because we want to color our experience. We want to color, we don't want to limit ourselves in terms of what's possible, because I think there's a truth in that there are unlimited possibilities in terms of what we can experience and what's out there. And so, something like Bigfoot, I don't know that I necessarily feel like that's a thing, but it's 100% real in that we've created it.
Yes.
And
yes.
I would believe someone if they're saying I saw it. But I think it's something, deeper that we have so much more, I don't want to say control, but we have so much more influence on what shows up for us as humans, and that we can not, and I don't like to even use the term imagine it, because our imagination is actually creating it, in the real world, in a very literal sense. So yeah, I don't like to limit. I like that term, the artifacts,
Yeah, it's just a way that I refer to it, because it kind of leaves open all opportunities for explanation, right? At that point, it's either a dimensional kind of thing, if it is something physical, or it's, a product of the matrix, like the ability to influence this area in a way that keeps us kind of on our toes. And it's another kind of method of distraction for those that aren't easily distracted. So it's kind of like levels of things to keep our attention here, maybe, is one possible opportunity. You have the bread and circus people, and it's 90 whatever % of people, and we know who we're talking about. But there's other folks out there like you, and I consider myself in that bracket, that question these things on a deep level, what the fuck is going on here? And then you'll get to a point where you're comfortable, and you're like, yeah, this is awesome, but you're still very open, that vulnerable state of awareness, right? But then you then maybe that's a thing, that's something that either you do from your subconscious to kind of keep something interesting and so mysterious that it keeps your attention and keeps you excited. I like what you said about the excitement, because that's something that I choose to go into the future with, because that's how I feel about it. I'm excited about it. All this bullshit going on, I think there's a lot to what you said too. You kind of just kicked right over it, but it is a deep thing that I really believe that what you perceive and those things out there are only out there as options. They're not directly affecting you and influencing you, again, great word, unless you allow them to. So, and I think that this happens on a very metaphysical level that translates to a physical level, because you're all that's here. You're all that's experiencing this. We're just talking to ourselves here, So, but it's a cool thing to experience, and it being a way that this operates, I think, is wonderful, because all the scary shit doesn't have to be here. That's just something that's here. And it was either created at the time we were created to have this game or experience, or it's just been a shitty way that these lizard people have done it for a little while. And I feel like the tides are switching on that. I think that a lot of people are waking up, if you want to use that term with it. Do you think there's anything to that?
Yeah, I was listening to an audiobook the other day, and I wish I could remember who the author was referencing when she was talking about this concept of demons or daemons. And this person had this idea that every soul or every person is born with a demon that's attached to it. And so this demon's job is kind of like the trickster archetype. And so it's there to challenge us and deter us away from our life's or our soul's purpose. But it's not just there, the deterring and the challenging and the tricking is also there for our self-actualization.
Yeah.
So you have to have that. You have to have that, that challenge or that thing that makes you question it in order to fully actualize. And so you cannot have the actualization without the demon, without the trickster there to kind of challenge you. And I really like that as a concept, with kind of like what you were saying too.
I love that as a concept. And I think that metaphor of the, in cartoons where you have the angel and the devil on your shoulder, I think that's like the metaphor for it, right? Because that caricature is always the face of the person with their little devil and angel side. It's right. It's them as those entities. And I think there's a lot to this. I just want to brag on the spiritual community for a little bit, of the alternate idea community, because we really embrace the scary side of shit. We're really okay with there's so much dichotomy here that it's dark light. It's just what has to exist. Not only are we okay of its presence, but we also have reverence for it because we understand that it's such a great motivator in the process. It's just a really cool thing, kind of, that we're all willing to admit that it's not only part of it, but a beneficial and necessary part of it. I think that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this kind of dovetails really nicely into exploring cyclical wisdom deeper if you want to go there, because
hell yes, let's fucking go there, Jenny. Let's do this shit.
All right. Because there are these two forces. And we know them as the yin and the yang, the yes and the no, the masculine and feminine. It's the basic premise of duality, which is like present in every religion, every philosophy, has this. Maybe not every philosophy, like there might be like, there's nothing, or I don't know. But pretty much everything has these polarities. And so when we look at a cycle, it's those two forces. Those are the two forces. Those are the angel and the devil that are sitting on our shoulders that are making time happen. And so we can look at these two forces as kind of the basic operating system of a cycle. And then there's like those four phases, like I mentioned before. And I'd like to go into more specifically what those four phases are so that people can start to recognize those phases within themselves. So the first one we'll start with is the darkness, or we'll go back to our seed metaphor because I think that's really easy. That's when the seed is buried deep within the soil. And the seed doesn't need light at that time. The seed needs darkness and just stillness. So when we look at seasonally, this would be the winter time. This is when, there's stillness. Nothing's really going on out in nature. And that quiet time, that still time, is absolutely necessary for the rest of the stages to happen. So when we look at the lunar cycle, this is the dark moon or the new moon, when it's there, but we don't see it. There's no light illuminating the moon in the sky. For a woman's cycle, this is when she's bleeding. This is the time when she should really be still, when she should be quiet, when she shouldn't be doing, when she should be completely focused on herself and completely focused inward. And so I like to think of this phase as when we're most connected to spirit, when we're most connected to source and the void, and also when we're most able to kind of hear messages from that living matrix, because when we're speaking, when we're doing, we're not listening and we're not receiving. And so this is the ultimate yin space in which we're receptive, in which our bodies turn into these tuning forks in which we can receive insight and guidance from ourselves. And I also like to talk about rite of passage because I think that's really important as human beings to recognize these significant markers in our lives. So this phase would be marked by death and also birth. So it's kind of like it holds both, because when we die, we enter into it, and we're born, we kind of like exit out of it. So it's kind of like that liminal space between these two states of being. Yeah. Any thoughts on that stage? I think this is one of the most misunderstood elements of our existence, and what it means to exist is like that period of doing nothing, because we see that as not good for whatever reason.
I love what you said, because I'm very guilty of this, and I've said this quite a bit, that I jokingly say that I just discovered this thing called self-care, right? And I think that that's kind of the idea, is you need those little moments just to shut down, be quiet, dude, just hang out. Now I do this intentionally in small ways for myself. Like I mowed this pattern back here and I go walking it barefoot and ground every night with the dogs. I'm very present. And what you said about the symphony, I think that every night when I walk out there, because we're fortunate enough to live out in the country where, it's pretty quiet out here. And by quiet, I mean people quiet. But the nature has a symphony going on around us all the time out here. And it's one of the coolest damn things, especially when the cicadas kick up and they're all going off and anyway. So that element of it is something that I do practice quite a bit, but the shutting down of it is something that I don't think people focus on. And people definitely don't see winter as that. As you were explaining it, it made more sense than anything, but I don't think it's something that I would have come to on my own had you not have said something about it. So it's one of those things that, yes, it absolutely makes sense. So that's brilliant. I really like it.
Yeah. And this is also like the nighttime of the cycle too. So, you just went right to like, yeah, when I'm at, walking at night. And it's absolutely true. Like if you think about it, like, I don't know, things just change when the sun goes down. Like my brain definitely changes. My consciousness changes. I feel more connected to spirit at night than I do during the day. Maybe that's not true for everyone, but I think there is something about like when the outer world is dark, the inner world illuminates.
Interesting. Yes, this perspective is perfect, and it's very, very deep. And people have done studies on this, and it's having to do with your circadian rhythm, photons. You're being exposed to the natural cycles of your environment, and whenever you isolate from those, and they put them like in caves and shit, and whenever you isolate from those, it throws you all off. Like you don't sleep. Your metabolism goes to shit. All sorts of things are interrupted in your ability to function normally. So these cycles are very necessary and important. And this is why doing little things as reminders of those, like little rituals, these people who are a little bit like OCD with stuff, well, that's okay. It's a cycle for you. It's a balance point. It's a touch point for your baseline. And things like that are wonderful. And one of the biggest probably cycles that people don't talk about is just it's wrapped up in the word habit. And so you have these habits of things that are truly just cycles and psychological things that you've chosen to participate in, whether it be consciously or unconsciously. And it's just interesting how much these seeming habits and cycles affect our lives. But also you can break these cycles and change any of this shit at any time. That's the best thing about it, is that you can hop to a new spiral anytime you want. You're still going to be elevating in consciousness. And perhaps the reason you chose to switch to a new spiral is due to your elevation in consciousness. You wise up a little bit and you want to experience something else. So I love your metaphors on this. This makes the most sense to me. Again, I just think this is brilliant. So what does the fall and spring have to do? Are these just preparatory for the next seasons?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because the winter and summer kind of mirror one another because they're opposite ends of the spectrum. One's like the beginning and one's like the end or the peak experience. And then the spring and the autumn are kind of like these crossing of the threshold parts of the phase. So the spring is like, that seed, that plant like crosses the threshold of soils on one side, sky is on the other, and it crosses that. And so we can think of this as like, when babies are born, they're said to, they don't really have an ego yet. Like they're kind of just, they're still very much in the first phase that we talked about. Like they're connected to spirit, they're connected to source. Like they're not really like an ego yet. Their ego hasn't come in. So the springtime or the next phase would be like when that ego comes in and you start to separate from spirit, you start to separate from source. So this is like, you start to become an individual. So we can see this in our lives when we're a young adult, or, the rite of passage of like puberty, or getting your first period. And so or even just like leaving home or anything that's like separating you from what you've grown out of. And hopefully, in the healthiest context, those roots are still there. Those roots are still very strongly grounded in spirit, in source. That's still your foundation, even though you're growing out of that. So the springtime is, it can be more of like a tender time. So this, for a woman in her cycle, this would be like after she's finished bleeding, but before she's fertile. So there's a fertile window in a woman's cycle in which she can receive the sperm to create a child.
Take in the splooge, everybody. Just suck it right in there. Yeah,
making
babies.
It's just what happens.
We're all adults here, right?
So like the springtime is before we get there. So, there's this, that yin energy from the first starts to transform into more of a yang energy as we start to have more motivation, have more drive. This is like what we're kind of talking before, like after that low time, there's like the turning point in which things start to look a little bit brighter. In the moon, this is like once you can start to see the light, it's like a waxing crescent up to like that first quarter moon when it's half illuminated. It's kind of balancing these two polarities. And in the same way, autumn does that as well, but in the opposite direction. So in the autumn, you know, we're transitioning from, actually, let's not skip over summertime because we'll just go in order here. So following that inner spring or outer spring is the summertime. So this is, like we said before, when the plant, you know, blooms or bears fruit. This is kind of like that peak experience. We can see this in our lives as marriage or having a child or creating something. Anytime, you know, it's when the self has become in union with the other, or union with the world. So this is like the coming together of two things to kind of create something new. And this is the most, I think, acceptable and valued point of the cycle in our culture, at least, because we so much value like creating something and actually doing something and having something to show for who we are, you know, because there's actually something that we can give to the world. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, but I think that there's an imbalance in terms of like the rest of the phases that we have here.
Interesting.
Yeah. So moving on then to the fourth phase, which I think probably is even more demonized than like the resting phase or the first phase that we talked about. And that's the autumn. This is like the death and decay. This is like, you know, in a person's life when they start to get older, when they're no longer fertile, like they go through menopause or andropause for a man, when they start, like their sex drive starts to lower. They may not have as much interest in the outer world. And it's because their self is now starting to make the descent back to unify back with spirit again. So if we think about that seed kind of going back into the soil, and this is really a time where we step more into our power. So the kind of the archetype that I like to associate with this phase is the magician or the enchantress, or someone who's like, they're not really in the world anymore. They've separated out of the world and they're making the descent back into themselves, which is back into source, back into their own power versus like looking outside of themselves for that. So yeah, this is in a woman's cycle. This is like when she's premenstrual. So like, this is like the witch. Like if you think of any archetype that's like the bitch, the witch, one who's not socially acceptable, one who's not welcome in the world, is because she's tapped into this need to release and accept the inevitable death of all that is.
Damn.
So this is like the Kali, you know?
Shit. I got to brag on my wife because she is not a bitch or a witch ever, actually. I've really got a good one. I will brag on her. Her only thing, and she won't mind me saying this, is that week before she gets clumsy, and it's adorable. So we'll be like, if we grill outside or something like that and she wants to carry stuff in, I'm like, I'll carry the steaks, you carry the silverware. You know what I mean? So like, and she drops shit all the time, bumps into stuff all the time. It's adorable. But we both kind of know about it, you know, and we're both, she'll like start to pick something up and I'm like, because I'm tapped into it too. I'm like, nope, I got this. And so, but these things are interesting when you start looking at them deeper, and especially when you start correlating to, like you said, the physiological changes, especially in a woman, to the natural cycles of our world around us, which we can all observe of any degree of, you know, sex or whatever, whether you menstruate or not. You can look around and see these things and then relate and understand them. So what role do you think that plays in your spirituality? Because whenever you talked about the yin yang, and what I thought about at this moment was kind of a horizontal line where the yin yang was split between the two, and your life on this earth, on this side of the dirt, you know, consciousness in this 3D reality is kind of that side of it, and then the death is the other side of it. And maybe that your spirit goes through that ebb and flow and that opening and swelling in peaks and valleys in this life as well. It's like you've always got a lot of spirit. But when you first get here, maybe it ramps up in small ways to where, and spirit might in that way mean the essence that is the most you, that is the most reason why you came here, depending on what you believe, right? But if that's the case, then whenever you slowly decay to die, it does. You kind of peak out and it flowers out and then it slowly decays and dies. And maybe in the spirit world, you go through something similar on the other side, some sort of process of either processing this life and like getting ready for the next one or whatever, right? I mean, it might be that literal. We might be able to, like I said earlier, we might anthropomorphize this out to the heavens as well and kind of relate this to things that we don't understand. You know, it might be a good model for it, right? At least it helps us in some way. What's your favorite part about this reality?
So what I find most interesting, and this is when I do my one-on-one work with women, how I tie this into, like, how I like to think about it is like, this is a map to explore your own unique spiritual path. And how that kind of unfolds is like, I totally dig what you're saying about like, you know, there's this greater cycle of like your life being in that young and then like, you know.
That was you. I was inspired by what you said. It was just the vision I had. I've never thought of it before what you were talking about. So what you liked about it was because of you. So thank you.
Yeah. I love it because, like, you know, being in that underworld, you know, there's things going on down there that, you know, obviously we can't know while we're up here. Maybe we can if we get like glimpses or special powers or something. But what I like to explore in my one-on-one work is what I like to explore is these archetypes that happen as we explore. And I mentioned them as I went through each of the phases. So like we can start to greet these archetypes that live within us on a monthly basis. And that's really a lot when you start off. So for example, I've just finished menstruating and I'm in my inner spring of my cycle. I start to notice that there's some issues that might be coming up of when I was a teenager. So the archetypes will come up in a cyclical way as well for us to kind of greet any unresolved traumas or issues that are holding us back from our own self-actualization and kind of evolving in our spiritual journey. So, you know, or in ovulation, you might notice like a woman might feel cramping during ovulation or at a time when she's supposed to be feeling really outgoing and engaged in the world and energized and motivated, she might withdraw and she might have cramping during ovulation when, you know, she typically that would not happen. And you might dig a little deeper and there's some trauma with either her own birth experience or birth experiences that she's had giving birth, or even relationship trauma. All this can come up. So when we start to understand these 4 phases, we start to see these patterns emerge in what comes up for us on a monthly basis or even seasonally. So it doesn't even have to be your menstrual cycle. And you don't have, I'm just using the menstrual cycle because that's what I do. But, you know, you can start to track your own patterns in regards to the moon so that you have something to relate it to. So if you start to just track what phase the moon is in, start to track, oh, I'm thinking about this thing that happened in my life again, just like write it down and have something there as a reference point so that if it comes up again, you can be like, oh shit, on the full moon, this always comes up. Or it can be seasonally too. So like every summer like something comes up and it's a something from my past. And I really, and we were talking about this earlier, like this ego drama that's kind of outplaying. And I think there's an element of like, we do have to kind of look at those things, especially with things that happened in the past, to integrate that, you know, like integrating the shadow is really important when we are trying to move forward in our life or trying to kind of evolve or spiral forwards in life. So that's kind of how I use a cyclical understanding to tap into my spirituality, because it shows me where I'm still like hung up or what maybe still needs to be addressed. But again, it's also tied into this place of just accepting myself more, because it's not like it comes up and I'm like, oh shit, like I still have to solve this. It's like, wow, okay, like, I'm in a different place now, and I've grown and I've evolved, and now's the time to kind of revisit these things in a way that might be helpful for myself or for other people in my life as well.
There's this idea, Stephen Pressfield wrote a book, and I've mentioned it 1,000 times on the show. Guys, just read the damn book already. It's called The War of Art, Stephen Pressfield. And he gives a name to these things that are adversaries that come up whenever you embark on these different journeys, right? But they're very predictable. And in this way, whenever he identifies it, what he's done is he's identified something and it takes the sting out of it. It's just like, oh, you're the resistance, fuck off resistance, and off it fucks. It's crazy because you can recognize this. And this is where your power comes in to be able to, like you said, just, okay, well, there it is. You passively observe it. And then eventually it just fucks off because it doesn't negatively need to present itself to you anymore, because it's not a lesson you need to learn anymore. I think you're only presented with the lessons that you need to learn at the time, but you will be. It's almost like a nostalgia. You kind of get reminded by changes in weather, right? Because they are cyclical, but they're kind of from a human perspective. I mean, a year is a decent amount of time, and you get 4 of those. So it marks these longer periods of time from our perspective, probably. But it's then when you, like you said, like different things trigger these different emotions or these different memories that pop up for you to kind of deal with again. And the ayahuasca thing is very interesting. I can't go an episode without mentioning that, because you said the word integration, because Carlos Tanner from the Ayahuasca Foundation was on recently, and that's exactly what he talked about, was integrating your past memories with a new light or a new vision with the aid of ayahuasca. And so even this tool in being able to address, recognize, and alter patterns in your life that are destructive, that no longer serve you from a spiritual perspective, then these are great ways for you to be able to analyze, realize, and move on. You're just, okay, cool, resistance, fuck off. And there was something that you said in there about, damn it, it was so cool, and now I lost it. Just because you're badass. Like, you've said so many damn cool shit. I'm just trying to think. Anyway, it had to do with cycles, and it was brilliant because you're brilliant, and it was great. So anyway. Well,
thank you. I was going to say something too here, and I think it had to do with this understanding of, like, the more we understand this cycle, the more, I think for the first few years that I was into this understanding, I almost felt like I became trapped by the boundaries that I was placing over what the cycle is. And so, but I think that, like, I was starting to feel like, oh God, why do I have to go through this every month? Or why does it have to be like this? And I think the more kind of awareness that we bring to cycles and understanding what they are and the different phases of them, and recognizing where we are in all these different contexts, both internal and outside of ourselves, is that we can transcend it, that we don't have to feel stuck in repeating this over and over and over again. But I think there's, like, that's part of the journey too. Like, that's part of that, like, trickster probably of, like, getting really, really deep in your patterns and really, really deep in your triggers or traumas and things that come up. Because that is that, like, adversary that comes to greet you so that you can slay the dragon, so to speak. But you have to have that kind of experience first in order to do that. There has to be a dragon in order for you to defeat it.
It's crazy you said that. It's something I'm not going to say on air, but I will tell you why that's interesting later. The way that I like to reference this is like a river, right? And all along that river is this is the flow of time, right? And the more direct you are and purposeful you are, and if you keep flowing, you get to see more, right? But along that river, there are little whirlpools along the side that are really cool. They're warm. There's shit to do over there. You can get caught in this area. It's nice. It's stable. The current's easy. And you can get really, really comfortable there. There's other people hanging out in there too that have figured this whirlpool out, and they're like, dude, this is great. Sometimes you might want to move to the European whirlpool, and now you get in the river, you kind of have a turbulent time, you move a little bit, and then now you're in this other whirlpool that we call Europe, and now you live there for a little while, right? But these stable conditions can exist, and it's all just a preference. Like, it's nothing good or bad, and that's what we're talking about here. It's just an observation. So if you want to get caught up in one of those whirlpools, absolutely do it. If you want to jump back in the river, yeah, the current's a little turbulent every now and then. And yeah, it's not as stable and predictable, but damn, is it cool. It's an awesome ride, and you get to see a whole lot more. So even thinking of life in terms of these cycles, where it's like this long continuation of thing and then it's over, and I get tripped out by like the quantum immortality type thing. Do you ever think about that kind of shit?
Yeah. I mean, I used to be much more engaged in exploring like quantum thinking, quantum consciousness, but it's been a while. So I would love to hear like what you have to say. I don't know if this is the right space for that, but what do you mean by that?
Well, it just has to do with like cycles. So I think about like the possibilities a lot. It's none of this shit you could probably prove from this perspective, and that's okay. I'm fine with it. But what I think about a lot is like, let's say you die, and that light at the end of the tunnel or whatever that people report after they die is just like you coming out of a vagina, and not even just a vagina, your mom's vagina again. And like you come through this life all the time. And maybe that's what being an infinite being is instead of thinking of it like you're living an infinite number of lives in an infinite number of ways is the idea. And if time doesn't exist, then we think of those things visually as like being a stretched out a shitload of yous existing in this time. But what if that's not the case? What if time doesn't exist because it's on a constant loop and all of it is happening, but it happens constantly? So when you do die from this perspective in whatever life or consciousness state you're in, then maybe you're just hopping back into this same life. And the only thing that's different is the tiny little adjustments and preference that you make along the way, which alter your course, thus the infinite nature of reality, right? But if you're talking about quantum immortality, that one I dig because that says that you never die, right? So in this life, in this world, you do get, splattered by a bus or your parachute didn't open or you got bit by a rattlesnake or something. But whenever that body dies, this avatar, you just continue on either in the same life where you didn't get bit by the snake or your parachute did open, and then you just keep living it, which would kind of nod to like deja vu or these cool ideas when you get really deep down the rabbit hole. But quantum immortality I dig just simply because it just means you continue on forever in whatever state. Maybe you wake up in a Arcturian's body, maybe you wake up and now you're an octopus on Europa, something like that. Just whatever the fuck you want, I think. But it's all possible, and that's like the cyclical nature of things like that. How it applies here would be that mind fuck of that you just constantly live this life over and over again, like some weird Groundhog Day. Like maybe Groundhog Day was the answer to everything. Maybe that's really what's going on, right?
Yeah, I'd be down for it. I mean, I love to explore those like thought experiments for sure. They're really fun.
That's it. What's the craziest one that you think? Like, what's the nuttiest thing that you've considered about what this reality operates in, or any idea that you got?
Well, as you were talking, it reminded me, I don't know if this was like the craziest one, but this one just came to mind. And it was an idea, and I don't even know if I can verbalize what it was, but it was with deja vu and how when we die, something about like, this is what it is. It wasn't about deja vu. It was about synchronicity. So every time we have a synchronicity, it's ourselves like speaking to us from the future, or from like the moment of death. So at the moment of death, we go back in time and we plant all of these synchronicities that kind of confirm that we're on the right path, or confirm which direction to go.
Oh, like breadcrumbs or indicators. See, and I've had this idea too, that you are your spirit guides, that it's just you from the future. It's not other entities like angels and shit. It's just you. I love that.
I feel the same way. Like I much prefer to believe that like we're everything versus like there's all these separate things. Like I always think that way when someone's like, oh, I'm the reincarnation of Marie Antoinette or something like that. It's like, well, we all are. Or maybe there's just like 12 like options, like 12 expressions or 12 different archetypes. And like we all like play around with some of them or all of them or something like that. But yeah, anytime someone says that, I'm like, well, yeah, I think it's more grand to say that like I can tap into not just any famous person, but anyone at any time and experience everything that they went through. And it's within me too.
Yeah, it's like the ultimate empathy. It's like what the Matrix does, where the Smiths can tap into whoever they want, and then, well, they consume and take over, which would be the metaphor, right? But you, from your perspective, you do more of like a being John Malkovich kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
That I dig. That's cool, because then you're just the observer, right? But then you're tapped into like the feelings. It's like, yeah, like I said, the ultimate empath thing. That's cool as shit. That would be a lot of fun. And yeah, at a deep level, I think that is probably what happens when you look at the model from a really, as if you could throw your head as far out as you can. Yeah. If we're all one, then you're all that's here. You're it, you know? And that's honestly my favorite perspective. It's also kind of the shittiest one, seeing what we do to ourselves everywhere, but it's an interesting one that there's the possibilities of people like you out there, and that's cool. You know, I like that.
Yeah,
you're one of my favorite parts of ourself. So thanks a lot.
Yes.
Well,
I appreciate the conversation as well, because, you know, I'm sure, you know, like this type of conversation is not as easily found as we might make it appear to be, since you and I are both here having it. But yes. Well,
you should stop by more often. You're welcome anytime. And we're gonna do some cool shit. I know I keep threatening to do these panels and stuff like that, but I really do have this stuff putting these things together, and I'd love to invite you to one. You are awesome. Like, I already know Amy Belair is going to love the shit out of you. Have you ever talked to her?
Well, she was on the Union of the Unwanted, and I totally digged what she had to say, for sure. I mean, I know Mike told me that I would really like her. So I haven't really listened to anything of hers, but I'm going to do that. So
I'm going to hook you two up. I just talked to her about 30 minutes before we started doing this. I just released this episode, and this won't come out for a couple of weeks, but I just released this episode where it was about the end of the world. I don't know if you saw that, but anyway, Amy and I have been talking a lot about it. We're going to do a part 2. And so anyway, it's really interesting. You would love Amy. Like, you've got to come by and have these conversations with us more, because we're always doing shit like this over here. So you are welcome any damn time. So let me ask you one more question, and then we'll wrap here, okay? Okay. Let's say that there is this great reset or this new world or whatever, and you have the chance they come to you and they say, okay, Jenny Rivers, you're the only one that can do this. You have one wish to change anything on the planet that you want. We're going to scrap this one and we're going to move forward. Kind of like in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? You get the whole new planet, right? So what would be one thing that you would either implement or change?
Well, I'll stay on topic here and say that I would encourage a synchronization with our inner and outer cycles. So what this would look like, I think, you know, there's a process that would need to be involved, and anyone can do this now. We don't have to wait for the permission slip from the powers that be. Is just start to notice your own inner cycles. This can be as simple as just like doing a daily check-in. How do I feel today? Am I in more of like a yang doing energy today, or I'm in more of like a yin receiving? And no judgment, like just acknowledge where you're at and recognize that you're in one stage of the cycle right now. And they're all so equally important to the other ones. And I think that, you know, there can be times where we're maybe out of balance, like we're staying in that not doing state, maybe like in a more depressed state, or we're staying in that like constantly producing, like manic, I have to work constantly and produce and all of that. So just recognizing, like, am I stuck in one or the other, or does there seem to be an ebb and a flow? And if there is an ebb and a flow, that's good. That's an indication that you're cycling and that you're probably starting to synchronize with some greater cycles. And I'll give some other like little things that I would like to see more of in the world. And one that's been fascinating me recently is supporting these biofeedback loops that we have with our environment. And one way to do that, that's really simple. And this is the other thing too, with how to harmonize and how to synchronize with cycles, is that they're going to be free. They're going to be accessible to everyone. You don't need any special equipment. It's just, you just do it. And I love that about this work. So one of the things that I've been experimenting and playing with is peeing on the earth.
Okay. I do that all the time.
Yeah. Because if you think about it, like, you know, the earth is receiving your DNA when you do that. And it's like alchemizing it and like changing itself to like tap into who you are, and it starts to understand you, and you start to understand it, and you become more like enmeshed with it. So as much as you can, like, doing that, peeing outside, walking barefoot on the earth, like you said, if you're a woman, put your menstrual blood, like, don't put your menstrual blood in the toilet, just put it outside, or put it in a potted plant, like dilute it with water. And you can do that. Like, if you don't have an outdoor space, you can dilute a little bit of your pee too. Just collect a little bit of your pee in a cup, pour it in when you water your houseplants, and just see what you start to notice. And I think what this is doing is synchronizing us with these greater cycles. I'm lucky to be with Michael Wan, where we look at the sky a lot. We talk about these things. We sit on a weekly basis, and he's created this thing called the Starboard. I don't know if you know.
It is so cool. Yeah.
It's so fucking awesome. And we call it the synchronizer, is because the more we've been doing it for going on 3 years now, where we move, every stone kind of represents a planet. And so every week, at least once a week, we move it, and at first it's like, we might guess what that means. Like, oh, the moon's in Gemini. Like, what does that mean? But the more we've done it, the more it's like, it's changing things for us. And we start to like look at the sky and actually know what we're seeing, versus like having to use some other reference book. And so it's like, it's becoming embodied. And it's allowing me to feel more connected, to feel like I belong here. And I think, like, as humans, we don't really feel like we belong. Like, we kind of feel a little bit like an animal and a little bit like an alien, or maybe a lot of either side of that. But the more that we tune our instrument to like join in this like greater symphony, is we start to have more wonder in terms of what it is that we're doing here. And it's like it's a deep knowing, and it's a trust. And that's kind of my hope, I guess, for what this new world is going to bring, is that we come into harmony with natural world, come into harmony with ourselves, stop trying to like control things and fight against what these natural cycles are. And, I think the amount of power, and it's not just about power, but it's a power that exists in harmony. So it's not like power over. It's like, it's a power that is blending with the other powers that are very strong, like weather and things like that. And I think, like we said before, the possibilities are really endless in terms of what we can create. I think humans are like amazing creatures. Like, if you think about like all these animals and stuff, like I just love all of it. And I don't know if this is like from me synchronizing with all that, but I think it's great.
I share your enthusiasm on this because I feel the exact same way. I'm a chronic optimist. I just love everything about everything. I can always find the light in the cycles. And that's part of it, right? You need folks like us out here saying it's going to be okay, guys. Quit taking it so seriously. Look, this has happened before. We can predict it. Now, what I like, back to the seeds and the putting stuff on your plants and things like that. Have you heard of those people that will spit on seeds and then grow the plants because it's got their DNA in it, and then whatever fruits out of that is suited for them to heal them of whatever the hell they've got problems with?
Love it. I have not heard of that, but love it.
Yes. Oh, it is awesome. They do this. It's an indigenous practice. I'm not knowledgeable enough about it to say, here's where it is, here's what it's from, but I do know it exists, and I know that it's for that purpose, and it's fascinating. Jenny Rivers, you are welcome on here any damn time. Thank you so much. This has been so great. You are wonderful.
Thank you so much for having me. You're a wonderful host, so I appreciate it.
Truly, truly grateful. We will do it again. You are Soul Tribe. You're welcome back anytime. Please give Michael a massive hug for me and a high five as well for the guy who still high fives. But thanks again. Please come back.
All right. Thanks. I will.
Well, that was amazing. Massive thanks to Jenny for coming out and hanging out with us on the show. She will definitely be back, guys. She is far too fascinating not to have back on for another amazing conversation. She nailed it with that. We don't get to have conversations with that every day. I wish that for everybody. I hope everybody has conversations like this in their world with someone like her. She's great. I think everybody should know Jenny Rivers. That's wonderful. So check out the show notes, guys, in the show description down there for all the ways to find her and us. If you want to find expandingrealitypodcast.com, it is linked in the show notes to expand your experience with us here on the show. If you want to donate to Patreon, show some love. That's value for value system. If you find the show valuable and you're able, go for it. It's down there. It's linked on the website, as well as Rockfin, YouTube. The video will be up over on YouTube and on our website as well. Also, we have t-shirts, merch, all that kind of good stuff. So go check that down in the show notes. And the music that you're hearing, guys, is by a good friend of mine, Vinny the Saint. Check him out as well. Phenomenal musician. He is so cool. So check him out down in the show notes also, guys. Go out into your week this week and look at this beautiful place. Start noticing some cycles around you. I think that's a very participatory way to engage in your environment, is do something actionable like note these different cycles around you. I think that's wonderful. So while you're doing that, though, get out of the left-hand lane, of course. Buy somebody in line around you a coffee or a meal or a bottle of water, something small. It doesn't have to be crazy, but it makes a crazy impact on everybody around you. That's how you shift somebody's shitty day cycle into something amazing, by doing something small like that. That's all it takes, and it's incredible. Be nice to every animal, entity, creature, everybody that you come across. Of course, pick up a piece of litter. Don't be a piece of shit. And then, above all, and anything else, guys, go out into this beautiful place, whatever the fuck this thing is, and y'all just be good to one another. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.
Grandma, can I have the chocolate chips?
This secret recipe moment made possible by Emory Heart and Vascular Center. When Grandma needed heart care, she came to Emory. The difference? Emory Healthcare performs more heart procedures annually than anyone else in Georgia, which means better outcomes for our patients. And we offer advanced and personalized treatments developed by our top specialists that others don't. Like Grandma knows, where you start your heart care matters. Smart Cookie. EmoryHealthcare.org/smartcookie.